Hi, I'm Sean McKee, and this is going to be an overview of one of the greatest instrument MIDI controller and music theory assistance systems ever made, the Hotz MIDI Translator. I'm going to give you a brief history of the system, as well as an overview of how it can be used. There are many devices and pieces of software available that aim to help teach music theory, accelerate the songwriting process, and bring joy and confidence to that process. They achieve these goals through a variety of methods, some by suggesting good chords to go to based on your current progression, some by laying out the notes of your chosen scale only on the white keys of a keyboard, and some by introducing a whole new hardware layout for MIDI control of those notes, allowing for diatonic scales, pentatonic, octatonic, whole tone, and exotic scales. Many of these new hardware devices are using small square rubber pads as the interface to play the notes, offering varying degrees of ease of use if you're trying to do anything beyond simple melodies, such as fast runs or bluesy two-handed organ solos, which can be difficult for two-handed play due to the tightly packed nature of their layouts. I wanted to talk about the granddaddy of all these devices, the Hotz MIDI Translator, which was invented by Jimmy Hotz and released in the late 80s. The technology was funded by Mick Fleetwood from Fleetwood Mac and distributed through Atari, and the accompanying software ran on an Atari ST computer. Large Hotz systems cost around $10,000 and were used by artists such as Mick Fleetwood, John Anderson from Yes, and Kitaro, to name a few. It was praised by technology giants such as Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple Computers, who said, "I have seen 3 things in my life that I instantly knew would have a profound effect on the future: the personal computer, the mouse, and the Hotz translator." The idea was that with economy of scale, the technology could be eventually built into lower-cost controllers accessible to the average musician. This didn't happen as Atari encountered a changing computer business landscape and eventually returned all rights to Jimmy Hotz. Even Jimmy doesn't know exactly how many units were made, but at least several hundred of various sizes and configurations can be confirmed. The MIDI Translator software component was ported to Windows and can work on a Mac using crossover virtualization software. Jimmy continues to make systems on a custom order basis to this day from his home in California. Let's look at the main Hotz unit. The thing to understand is that every single pressure-sensitive membrane key can be configured through software to do whatever MIDI function you want it to, but I'm going to show how it is in its standard configuration. You've got these 6 main sets of keys. Starting from the bottom row going up, they output on MIDI channels 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the columns of keys from left to right output on MIDI channels 7 and 8. Channels 5 and 6 are reserved for an additional wing hardware unit which connects directly to the main unit. There are 8 small sets of 3 keys. Each set controls pitch bend up, pitch bend down, and modulation. From bottom up, they are output on MIDI channels 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left side, and 7, 8, 9, and 10 on the right side. A wing unit will have its own sets of 3 keys for pitch bend and modulation on channels 5 and 6, so those aren't needed on the main unit. This is like having multiple keyboards, each with a different sound in one compact setup. You can be a one-man orchestra like Vangelis with this setup. All these MIDI channels feed into the Hotz MIDI Translator software, which is necessary to get the full potential of the hardware. The software is so deep, I only have a moderate understanding of all it can do. The manual doesn't cover all the possibilities. And talking with Jimmy Hotz for a few hours only confirms the level of complexity and flexibility in configurations that can be had. That said, out of the box, it is configured to work in a very intuitive way. The Hotz box still rivals and even exceeds modern-day music theory assistance systems. There are users out there who are using this system with the original Atari ST computers, which is cool and all for a retro vibe, but I'm using mine with the latest version of the Hotz software running on Mac OS, using virtual IAC MIDI ports for routing the signals from the Hotz software to Logic Pro to trigger either virtual instruments or physical synthesizers. For writing a new song, I go to File, Open Song, and select the Writing 3 template. To start, you need to know what key and scale you want to be in. There are a number of pre-configured setups that come with the software to cover basic scales so you can get started immediately. But the real power comes in being able to map out setups with any scales and chords you want to suit a specific song you're writing or playing live. The software comes with every imaginable combination of scales, chords, inversions, and even microtonal scales used in other cultures like Indian ragas. I'm going to begin with a D-sharp major configuration, which I select here in the Conductor Master section of the software. I'm also going to configure the system to output all the MIDI information to a single MIDI channel, channel 1 for this example, by clicking here to funnel every row with chords, scales, and arpeggios to the selected channel. On the Hotz box, the top row here is called a conductor, which controls the layout of all the other rows. The first key will play a D-sharp major chord, with subsequent keys playing the next chord in the D-sharp major sequence. When you press a key, you'll see in the software on the piano what are the notes that are actually being output by the MIDI Translator software. The next row lays out all the notes of the D-sharp major scale. In this example, these notes stay the same no matter what chord you are playing. The next row lays out the notes of the current chord, which would be an arpeggio. When you change the chord on the top row, the layout of the third row will change to match the notes of the new chord. These top 3 rows are the main ones I use when writing. The bottom large keys are another row, which would be an arpeggio. And the 2 side columns are the notes of the chord or arpeggio laid out vertically. Remember, all of these can be on a different MIDI channel. So if, for example, you're improvising some orchestral ideas and want to do a descending harp glissando, the vertical keys kind of make sense for a harp where the higher notes are further from you at the top and the lower notes are closer at the bottom. To take things a step further, you can program the conductors to have multiple splits with different scales spread across one row, as in this example here. Now, I've got an additional 61-key MIDI controller here programmed into the system to switch conductors, giving me additional conductors in a row. By that, I mean on the Hotz box, I've got 15 conductor keys here, whereas on the 61-key MIDI controller, I've got 36 white keys to use as conductors. So if we're dealing with 7-note scales, I could potentially have 5 different scales and all the chords of their scales position laid out as conductors on the 61-key controller, or up to 52 different conductors on the white keys of a full-size 88-key controller. So I'm opening up another setup here with 3 scales split out on the conductors. The first is a major scale, the second is a Japanese hirajoshi, and the third is a Jewish ahaba rabba. Here's the major part. Here's the hirajoshi part. And here's the Jewish ahaba rabba part. To go even a step further, you can program each conductor to be a totally different chord with a different scale with a different octave range. So a possible use for that would be going sequentially through the different changes of a song or a set, or having someone with the Conductor Master do that for you live off stage. One thing to know, let's say you're playing a lead over chord changes and you're switching conductors. By default, the chord will sound. This is because the chord depth in the Conductor Master window is set to -1 to play the chord structure in memory. If you set this to 0, no chord will sound. If you set this to 5, 6, 7, 8, etc., that's how many notes of the chord structure will sound. This is covered in the manual. To program the conductors, you first press the conductor key you want to edit. Then you go to the conductor master window for chord and choose the key that you want. Then select the table that you want, which gives you a huge list of types of musical structures, as you can see here. Then you do the same for your scale. Melody, according to the manual, is an expert function to be covered in future documentation, so it doesn't do anything now. Then press another conductor key on the main unit and repeat these steps. Be sure to save your song, as this will contain all the conductor information you just made. Another way to program conductors that will save to the conductor list per song is to go to the Song Advanced Programming Cue list. And this method is also detailed in the manual. Another option is to lay out wide intervals that would be nearly impossible to play or reach with one hand. Some are included, like 11ths and 13ths, but anything can be programmed in the MIDI tables. Besides an actual piano keyboard, I like the layout and feel of the Hotz box better than any other MIDI controller device out there. The sizing of the keys gives you room for spirited jamming without trying to perfectly land on small squares as with other devices. The membrane keyboard gives no resistance compared to rubber pads, allowing for fast slides and glissandos. As I mentioned, it's customizable through the software, and one customization I did was to temporarily shift the entire range up an octave with a foot pedal, since with 21 horizontal keys you've only got access to 3 octaves of the scale, so this tweak gives me 4. Jimmy Hotz helped me with this tweak, and it involves MIDI filtering and other advanced functionality that the average user may not figure out on their own. There's one other feature that the Hotz system has, which was touted as a major educational and inspirational feature when it was first released, which is the ability to program conductor changes to timecode and have the system automatically switch keys and scales with the changes of a pre-recorded song. This is called Hotz Coding, and there were even CDs released that had the coding embedded, so you could buy an album and just play along with it. It was inspirational because it allowed beginners to immediately feel comfortable and confident to play and eventually create music. Hotz Coding is probably one of the coolest features of the system. It lets you record your conductor chord changes into your digital audio workstation, and then when you play it back, the Hotz box will automatically change key and scale to correspond with the chord changes. So once you record your chord changes, you can work on other parts, melodies, or just jam over the whole song, and you'll always be in the right key and scale. No other system in existence offers this feature, at least that I'm aware of, which is surprising considering this was developed over 30 years ago. So using the example I played earlier, I'll record just the conductor chords and the Hotz code into Logic. Here's the chords. And you'll see here that the Hotz code is simply white keys triggering the conductors. So I have a virtual MIDI port called Hotz Code, where it records this on this input, and then when I play it back, the Hotz code goes out to the MIDI port that the Hotz translator uses for its input to change the conductors. I'll turn the chord depth to 0 in the conductor master window, since I won't need the chords to sound anymore since I've just recorded them. So because I'm using a secondary keyboard to control the conductor changes and also to get the Hotz code to get into a digital audio workstation, I had to make a custom MIDI routing configuration. So I'm using MIDI aux to do that here. And you'll see that the Hotz box is going to the Hotz translator software, as well as my Arturia Keylab keyboard is going to the Hotz translator software. And that's, on all channels. These are virtual MIDI ports over here. In the Apple computer on Mac OS, they're called IAC bus ports, so I've just named them here. Now, to go to the Hotz code from the Hotz box, I'm only sending MIDI channel 4, which is, as I explained earlier, what the conductor channel is. And then on the Keylab, I'm just sending MIDI channel 9, which also switches conductors. And you'll see here that when I press a key on the key lab, you'll see MIDI channel 9 is going to both the Hotz Translator software and to the Hotz Code bus, which is then being recorded by the digital audio workstation. And you'll see that when I press any of the key rows on the Hotz box, except for the conductor channel, channel 4, that nothing is sent to Hotz Code except for channel 4. Besides the wing unit that adds MIDI channel 5 and 6 to the main unit, there are also smaller standalone units that give you the scale and the notes of the chord or arpeggios laid out, but required another keyboard to be the conductor master. They have an interesting quirk though, where on the bottom row of the 21 keys, which start as arpeggios, you have 13 keys for the arpeggios or the notes of the chord, and the last 8 keys are notes of the scale that start at the 7th degree of the scale. The top row also has notes of the scale, but starts 6 notes earlier at the 1st degree of the scale, so there is some overlap between the layers. As an accomplished guitarist, I know a lot of scales and chords, traditional and exotic. I've used a MIDI guitar to compose orchestral music, but it's not the most accurate way to put ideas down, and many times needs editing after the fact. I've always looked for ways to get my ideas out faster. Keyboard offers several advantages, but I'm not as skilled on keys. I don't have the same amount of hours invested in it memorizing scales and chords in every key. The Hotz box helps me overcome that limitation and get the ideas in my head out quicker. Some people may call the Hotz technology and similar devices cheating, but at the end of the day, you can have a layout with no wrong notes, but it still requires a good ear and talent to choose the perfect notes that will make a great piece of music. Technology, and more recently artificial intelligence, will never take the place of the musical decisions of a good composer. I hope this video helped anybody looking at one of these devices on the used market or considering to have Jimmy Hotz build a custom one. Some features I'd like to see on a modern version would be an LED scribble strip on each row that shows the conductor chord names loaded and what notes are loaded up when you switch conductors. This would require an update to the software to communicate back to the main unit, possibly over a USB connection. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time.